How are you guys? I know no one's on yet, but someone might watch it later. But yeah, there's I don't know, a good group of Tibetans here. They've just come from the Chinese embassy, having a protest. I'll go up there. I'm just going to make coffee and I'll go up and film some of their signs and hear what they've got to say.
Just got the notification, Tibetan Protest.
Yep. Yep. No, I'm watching it. Oh no, young Greg got it. He's going to be our new live streamer.
No, all good. Oh, there's 7 watching now.
Well, you better tell them what's going on while I make coffee.
Yeah, the Tibetans have marched up from the Chinese embassy up to Parliament today. So there they are up there. Oh, as I'm listening to my video before I post it. Corey's going to go up there soon, video some of their signs. We just got on the speaker.
And so this is the final stop on our rally today. So we had started at 3 o'clock this morning.
So there you have it, Diggs. G'day, Yak.
Beautiful day in Canberra.
No, cool, Daniel. You're here now, bro. Corey will be here soon, take control of this. I'll go post a little video I've made with the Tibetans, our group. Enjoy your day. Princess Dock's in Geelong now, David. Just down the road from me. Funny that. Perfectly good dock in Melbourne, I thought. Still me, not Corey yet. Just put it in, you might be able to hear the speakers.
Freedom of religion, culture, language. That's the Chinese propaganda. Standing here together, we know, as amongst us there are political prisoners, amongst us there are people who have fled from Tibet on foot over the Himalayas, the highest mountain range in the world, to escape Chinese oppression, to escape this supposed benevolent rule. We know that the Chinese over the past 64 years have systematically and deliberately tried to destroy our culture. And we know now, thanks to the research and the incredible work done by Tibetan organisations like the Tibet Institute, we know that inside Tibet, that the Chinese government is implementing maybe the most horrific policy that they have ever tried to implement in Tibet. And that's saying something, considering that for 64 years they've jailed, tortured, raped and imprisoned anyone that spoke out against them. The new policy, which is terrifying all Tibetans and people of any sense of dignity and any sense of importance of human rights, is a policy of separating Tibetan children from their parents and interning them in colonial boarding schools. Independent reports, and this is supported by the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights, have found that the Chinese are systematically separating Tibetan kids and interning them in colonial boarding schools to the number of between 800,000 and 1 million. So on this uprising day, we stand together, standing against this oppression as a voice for those Tibetans inside Tibet who have endured 64 years of oppression, and also standing as a voice against the continued policies of destruction and cultural genocide inside Tibet. So I want to thank you all for coming today. I want to now invite everybody to sing the Australian National Anthem, because we must recognise that if we had been standing together here as Tibetans with our flags, singing our national anthems, calling for freedom and justice inside Tibet, we would all be imprisoned. So I think it's only right that we as Australian Tibetans stand up and sing the national anthem of the country which affords us the freedom to speak out on behalf of our Tibetan brothers and sisters. So please join me now in singing the Australian National Anthem.
to make this commonwealth of ours renowned all around. For those who come across the sea, we boundless waves to share. With courage let us all combine to our flag so say our prayer. In joyful strains then let us sing our flag so frail your fair.
Well done. Beautiful.
Glad someone appreciated it. I'd now like to introduce our first speaker for the day. It's Dr. Zoe Bedford, the Executive Director of the Australia-Tibet Council. Dr. Bedford has been a long-time supporter of Tibet and has long worked with the Australia-Tibet Council. Should be familiar to many of you. I want to also thank Katie as well from the Australia-Tibet Council for coming today and organising this event. Please give Dr. Zoe Bedford a big warm welcome.
Hello, Tashile. Thank you everyone for coming today. I just want to start by reading a statement that's come from some of our parliamentary friends. So in Parliament there's a group, the Australian All-Party Parliamentarian Group for Tibet, and they've issued a statement for today. So I'm just going to read it out as it is and then I'll say a few more words. So, statement on Tibetan Uprising Day. The co-chairs of the Australian All-Party Parliamentary Friends of Tibet would want to recognise Tibetan Uprising Day today. Observed on 10th of March every year, it commemorates the 1959 Tibetan Uprising, which ultimately resulted in a violent crackdown on Tibetan independence movements and in the flight of the Dalai Lama into exile. Since that time, it's estimated that more than 1 million Tibetans have been killed, and the Chinese government policy of resettlement of Chinese people to Tibet means Tibetans have become a minority in their own land. We echo the statements of UN Special Rapporteurs for Minorities, Cultural Rights and Freedom of Religion, who have drawn attention to the separation of 1 million Tibetan children from families and their forced assimilation at residential schools. Australia should continue to raise concerns about this Chinese government policy, which appears to amount to a policy of acculturalization and assimilation of Tibetan culture to dominant Han Chinese majority through a series of oppressive actions against Tibetan educational, religious and linguistic institutions, in contradiction with the right to freedom of religion and belief, the right to education and cultural rights of the Tibetan people. We also wish to highlight concerns about the lack of religious freedom in Tibet, including the disappearance of the Panchen Lama 28 years ago. We call on the Australian government to support the Dalai Lama and Tibetan people by committing to recognise only a Dalai Lama appointed by Tibetan Buddhist tradition and practices. On Tibetan Uprising Day, we wish to emphatically state that universal human rights are fundamental and must be respected. Currently, the Chinese government is violating the human rights of Tibetan people, and CCP officials must be held to account. Over decades of occupation, the Tibetan spirit for freedom is still going strong, as evidenced by Tibetan Uprising Day actions across Australia. We wish Tibetans all the best and commit to supporting their rights and freedoms today and every day. Signed by the co-chairs of the Australian All-Party Parliamentary Group for Tibet, Susan Templeman, Senator Janet Rice and Senator Dean Smith. And we thank them very much for their words.
All right, I'll go and get Corey.
So actually in that statement is some good things, that we have some parliamentarians who are willing to fight or do their best for Tibetans, and that's important. Change begins through a lot of mechanisms, but one of the ways that we need to do is encourage our political leaders here in Australia to stand up for Tibet and to take that to the UN and to use Australian laws and mechanisms to try to hold those in China to account for what they're doing. There are some laws that we have here now that Tibetans and other community groups have fought for, such as Magnitsky laws, which are being underutilised right now and need to be implemented on CCP officials. Those CCP officials who have put this policy for putting Tibetan children into boarding schools need to be held to account and sanctioned under the Magnitsky Act. This would mean that they can't have any funds in Australia, they can't have any relatives come to Australia, and they would have trouble traveling to Australia. But fundamentally, what it means is that they're being held to account for their actions, the human rights abuses of Tibetan people. Right now, one of the threats to Tibetan people here in Australia, because even though you live in Australia, your freedom is curtailed still by the CCP. We know, and the Australian government knows, that many people face threats to their family, that if they come to events like this or speak out against the CCP, that Chinese officials might threaten their families who remain in Tibet. And that's not good enough. CCP officials who do these things need to be held to account, because you can only be free if your family in Tibet is free. You know, if your family's not facing repercussions for the actions that you take here in Australia. And in a free country like Australia, that freedom should be afforded to you. So Australian parliamentarians need to do more to ensure your freedom by ensuring that your family in Tibet is free from this kind of oppression. The UN might call this policy of the CCP a culturalisation and assimilation, but I'd like to be much more plain than that and call it cultural genocide. We've seen this strategy before in Canada and the US, where Indigenous children are separated from their families and put in residential schools. We've seen it here in Australia, where Australian Aboriginal children were separated from their families and forced to assimilate into white culture. And we know that this is one of the worst colonialist tactics, targeting children to try to end the language and the cultures and traditions of a people. And people think that colonialism is something of the past, but it's not. It's here, it's happening right now in Tibet under the CCP. This is a strategy to try to eliminate Tibetan language, Tibetan religion, and Tibetan culture. And I'd like for us to go forward calling it what it is, cultural genocide. And it needs to be stopped, it needs to end now. Australia is renewing trade relations with China. Penny Wong went to China last December to talk to them about renewing trade relations. And I say, shame on them. China is violating human rights and separating Tibetan children from their family, and Australia should be issuing Magnitsky sanctions on CCP officials, not rewarding them with trade deals. So the Australian government is not doing enough currently and needs to do more to protect Tibetan people. We need to be holding CCP officials up to account for their actions by issuing Magnitsky sanctions on them. And this would show CCP officials that the world is paying attention to what they're doing and that they don't have impunity, their actions have consequences. So thank you all for coming, and I'd like to say, free Tibet.
Free Tibet! Thank you.
Again, many thanks to our friends at the Australia-Tibet Council, who we all know have been by our side for so many decades now. So many Australians have given their time, they've donated money, they've given their efforts to support the work of the Australia-Tibet Council, and we know that we will continue to work together and keep doing that good work. So yeah, many thanks again, Zoe and Katie, for coming today and for always being there for us. I think it's important here to stop and reflect a little bit on where we are. So we are on the lawns of arguably the most successful, the lawns of the parliament of arguably the most successful democracy in human history. America might want to claim that mantle, but I think Australia's parliamentary system and the system of government that we have, the way of life that we have, which is really a reflection of our governance and the way that our government works and the way that our elections work. We're on the lawns of like a really important institution. And I think we as Tibetans, we are on our own journey. Obviously, we're struggling for our freedom today, but we can take pride in the fact that after His Holiness the Dalai Lama bestowed upon us the ability to elect our own leaders and have elections, we have now a vibrant democracy. We contest our elections, we disagree with each other, we argue, but we all vote. We have tremendous voluntary voting, probably unparalleled in anywhere else in the democratic world. We have engagement, And we can be very, very proud of that, that we have done justice to the immense gift that His Holiness has given us. So many of us here have engaged in that process. We have a former parliamentarian here. We have people that have campaigned. We have people that have sought election. We have people that have served in this government. So I think we can all take great pride in the fact that we have done that. And I want to now invite my next guest, who is really a tremendous reflection on this this effort by the Tibetan people to build upon the democratic principles that our movement is based on, that His Holiness espouses. It gives me great pleasure to invite our next guest, Mr. Tenzin Puntuk Doring, our member of Tibetan Parliament, who was born on the 26th of July 1985, and he was educated in Missouri, like my wife, like many of you here. He's completed Masters of Philosophy and Political Science. He's done lots of the things that we should all admire. He's been a engaged member of activist organizations. He's been executive committee member of the National Democratic Party of Tibet, and now stands in Parliament on our behalf. So I'd like to now invite Tenzin Puntuk Doring to say a few words.
Thank you so much for this wonderful introduction. I'm also inspired more with what you have been saying so far this morning. Basically, I'm going back to India day after tomorrow, which is very early morning, so I'm left with tomorrow only. But what I thought was that I have never missed 10th March in my life ever since I knew that there is a March 10th. Starting from India and then here in Australia. The last time I attended March 10 was when I was in India. The plane was flying right at the Dharamsala, and I told the taxi driver, drive me straight to the Bulakang where I should attend. I changed my clothes on the way in the taxi itself. Because if I miss March 10, I would not be able to sleep well on that very night, and I will definitely have everybody, those in Tibet who have sacrificed their lives in the past, present, and definitely in the future, that I will be so discouraged myself. So I never want to miss March 10, and which is the reason why I came today this morning and going back anyway tonight. So I want to say a few words in terms of China, that China needs to start few things, in fact numerous things, and stop at the same time numerous things. The first thing that China needs to start now is start negotiating or talking with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. It is a high time. The Chinese leaders might think that Xi Jinping is 60 years old, but His Holiness is 87 years old already, and we can't wait enough, right? The Chinese Communist Party is pretty much like going to be a century years old. I don't know how far it is going to exist in China, but we have the responsibility to bring down the Communist Party from power, not because we hate them, but because when you bring down the Communist Party of China from power, you are going to replace the vacuum with the democratic parties, where people's different views, different cultural backgrounds, different political views are respected and are shared among the people. You know, China itself is 1.4 billion people. You can't expect 1.4 billion people to think in one direction, in one way all the time, right? Even though the Tibetans are Buddhists and we are free to think whatever, we have a lot of differences in terms of what we want to say, what we want to think, what we want to live, the way we want to live. China, 1.4 billion people means each people have one mind at least. And when one Communist Party that has just 100 million, even though it could be one of the largest political parties in the world, in terms of the population of China, it is nothing. 100 million ruling over 1.4 billion people, not just for 1 year, not just for one term, for over 60, 70 years. And that is at the doorstep of us. And we need to stop that, before which we have a lot of hard works to do. We have been doing a lot of hard works. We have been taking a lot of time. We have been learning a lot of things, but we have to do it harder. We have to put more and more effort in whatever way we can, in whatever way anybody can, so that the Tibetans can at least finally have their home. You know, I'm the third generation of Tibetans. My grandfather was a prisoner. My father, he died soon after he was released from the detention center, just a week later. and that blood is still in me, which is why I am always there. And it is not just March 10. The thought of fighting for freedom is always there, day and night. It is the March 10 that we have to tell the people that this is the day when Tibetans have clearly expressed that they don't want to live under the communist rule. They don't want to live under an oppressive rule, and they don't want to live under a one-party military dictatorship. Therefore, I request, in a polite way as a Tibetan, that the Xi Jinping has every authority to speak to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, or for that matter, anybody in the way of His Holiness or any leadership in exile, and it is high time, high time. I will tell you one thing, the Tibetans cannot forgive China if His Holiness passes away in exile. That I can guarantee you. The Tibetans will never accept that. Tibetans in Tibet, even if they are in the 4th, 5th generations, still looking for His Holiness, hoping in Him that one day He will come back to Tibet and stay and live in the Potala Palace. And this is the 4th and 5th generation Tibetan people who have never seen His Holiness since 1959. And that hope we still have. Therefore, we have a lot of responsibilities, but we have very less time because His Holiness is 87 years old. If he prays, hopes to live 113, but still we need to work much more. And then I can request the Chinese government to stop a lot of things which I want to mention few. The Sinicization of Tibetan is not only hurting the Tibetan sentiments, it is hurting everybody. As we say, Tibet is from the land of compassionate. It is from the land of snow. Many countries think that by leaving Tibet as an issue for China, they are misconstructing it, mismanaging it, and whatever the policies that any foreign countries have in terms of Tibet in relation to China, they must relook into it, beginning with Australia, where I'm just standing in front of. Have you ever watched a film called 2012? When there is a global warming and a flood, everybody finds a safe refuge in Tibet. That is just an example in terms of fiction. But I think Tibet as the highest plateau that enjoys one of the largest river resources to Asia, even if it is not a political issue, it is a human issue. It is an environment issue, and it is a human rights issue, which should not be discounted. By calling His Holiness the Dalai Lama as separatist, I think China is lying with red face in front of them. His Holiness was awarded Nobel Peace Prize. He has millions of followers loving him, liking him. When Chinese government says he is separatist and demon, of course I feel laughing. Many world countries, world leaders must be laughing, but due to what the power of China has, they could not speak. But we must also understand that the military and the economic power just alone is not enough to survive as a state. If you want to build a nation state, it must be built on the basis of people's thought, people's feelings. Nationalism is a feeling. Today, you and I are together here because we have the same feeling that the Tibetans have inside Tibet, that Tibet was a free country, Tibet was an independent country, and if Tibet should not become an independent country, if Tibet is not free in the future and the situation continues, that's not going to be right. We have just 6 million people, but still 100 million Chinese Communist parties and 1.4 billion Chinese have not been able to kill down our struggle so far. Finally, I want to tell the Chinese people in Australia, Chinese people in everywhere, especially in China, if you don't stand up for Tibetans, you are also a complicit in Chinese Communist Party's policies and their actions. I and you both know that there are more than 400 to 600 million Chinese Buddhists who always want to meet His Holiness. And when China is not allowing His Holiness to Tibet, when China is not allowing His Holiness to China, they are also depriving the human rights, the religious rights, the spiritual rights of the Chinese people. And China, being the largest people in this world, the most populous country in this world, you have every right to speak up for the Tibetans and speak up for you. Therefore, I request the Chinese people not just to bow down under the Chinese Communist government. Come with us, stand with us, and we can enjoy the freedom together in the near future. I also want to thank the Australian leaders, particularly Janet Rice this morning, a wonderful lady. She has been consistently speaking up for Tibetans in the parliament as well as outside the parliament. And we, when Senator Janet Rice speaks up for Tibet, she might, or many might think that we are here just listening, but the Tibetan people inside Tibet are listening. They are finding every means to listen to us. Therefore, each word she says, each word we use in the speech is a powerful tool to bring hope for the Tibetans inside Tibet. Therefore, we must unite together. Whatever the differences we have one common goal, free Tibet, and it must be the goal of all of us till the end of our life. No matter where you live, whether you live in the United States or Canada or Australia or India, but this feeling of oneness, this feeling of unity and the goal to free Tibet must always present here. And I want to thank the wonderful guy there. He has been speaking a lot, and the manner in which he had used the words, that is really, ignited my mind. And I will continue to learn from you as well. Even though I'm the member of parliament, my mind is always open. It is outside the door of the member of parliament. So I will continue to learn from you. 아나가 벽에 나는 책정이 시작이 나나도 벽은 좀 돼요. 네가 나가 책이 가대 중립을마 죄를 왔다 저조소가 줘야 돼. 아니 뒤인데 선발이야. 다 죄 자주다 상명이. 나가대 원에 지리 지금 원에 남부솔로 쉬어 더버지 가중 라바이 나 지리 원에 남내 지리 나 돈이 대신속이 원에 남내 지리 남서 벽은 창만 와. 탑수백이 차디요래. 탑수백이 랑신도 구글에. 와. 가전에 나와 있나? 직치도야 나오는 걸 되들 현대스 쇼시와래. 이날에 숨주 투진 내용들, 겨울음지 총괄 내용들, 변화는 미직 메달 겹인데 선바는 쑥 겹인 것도 쑥탕시험 어떻게 그래? 가전에는 베베 미직 메달 겹도 베베 미숭하게는 수수 겹으로. 뒤인데 선발이야 갓뒤이네. 선배 나눠라. 뒤인데 믹산에 가 망고시는 레서 그나마 고집배하고 세자 토지체스 라인으로. 나에 대해 연구의 김전디 현수 연구가 하고 당하는 신경 고아에 있는 딸리려고 왔음주 되는 지금 게임도 선박이 하나 되면 망보로 좀네 나라 있는 심구 대배직다 심술래야지 당하는 신경 하나도 심술 술이야 심 간제스 바로 보도네 띵이 껴쩍게 배준치기 그런 중원에 있네 가불가불 만족이 깨듯이 미망기는 마 되는 내가 지기기들에 그냥 망보직이야 때문에 내가 지고 와 이기든 수연의 내가 전에 이기든 템버에 내가 전에 대 단다다 시스템 가지 제도 리기도 선바 돈에 마돈에 고지층에 내가층에 정말 토지지 쇠직다 아니 이거 쇠직라 오스트레일리아의 독슬레바다가 로아 비대튼서 고아되는 주도부치야 로아 비대튼서로 주가 있나 베베 탑줄 내가 치기 왜 캡사워다 딱 가시 로아 비대튼서에 맞주 키게 맞주 시대 따야 그 베베 맞으려면 맞지 로아 저 베베 심시 민도 나는 이게 타나 주니 딱저 치모도 얘네 내주든지 누 중국도 나 망고 동요 임베 이ner래 베베 이나 책 좋아지기로 왔다 대대는 연구만 봐. 얘네들 막 카운슬도 니 도지치学인들 얘네들 다 망고지기야 용모도 얘네들 차시워데 이나 마음발라. 와 카운슬 마음이 쓰이 그래서 뭐 신경 봐. 얘 뭐좀 니라 그 카운슬 세제. 진짜 교수도 연구를 했다. 깨버데 숙제 연구를 했다. 생수 망수 연구를 했다. 시기 아니 비례전선나 주투에 비례전원에 자식 개별선 시기에 카운슬 수소원에 소소소 밑레디기 갱키니 비례전선나 주투가 있나? 빼면서 야구 여자선을 등에 비교이 와 아니 지난 비교마다 수수 타전의 주에랑 땡땡이 연구에 빼야 그래서 today agency 당기 대 프랑스 송수와 단들 독도 주의 당한서 오스트레일리아 나로로 탑재다 저와 태가 유배기 레구페 등에 각도 있는 agency를 와 아디 agency단 그래서 냠도 지시기요래 agency 나로라 그냥 믹스에 오스트레일리아게 메시지 하디 기는데 여봐 있나 agency를 간테스로 고치도는 지로시로 와 결국은 여기다 비례 천사등을 내가 지지와래 벤조고 돈에 겹쳐 고도 왜 거에 쳐봐 있나다 에이전시 나올라 벤조고 겹쳐 등에 망고 좀 있게 고 사실 좋아 아니 신경 나올라 되게 그냥 뒤쳐모도 봐 있나 먼저 단다들 되고 그럴 때라 되나 말 롱나서는 나는 되게 하고 차게 돼 이제 선바 에이전시 들이야 오늘 단양 안 한쪽이 벤조고 돈에 겹쳐 고도 왜 미나라야 주니 내가 치고 고도 왜 뒤지게 아전에 Amnesty International 내가 내 공기 좀라 더 지도에 나와래 근데 이게 더 가서 속고 친구 된대 지나 내가 수교랑 가서 미국다 쓰길 내가 그래 미국 따와도 냠도 안 소수원에 가르쳐 줘야 돼 근데 직năng 토바이네야 권냐 가지고 세게 선에 소수스네 디나리아 멤버 주에도 고만이 미생활에 지금 시점은 더 로직라 이내래 your voice can be heard in this international organization 와 디냐 같이 자고 도스제 디 아니 얘 뭐네 간또도 지게다 딱 얘기 누가 쪽서 지게래 와 벤주고 돈에 과를 주고도 내 주고래 카기 깨지시는 과 주고도 내 주고래 투주 과 땅으로 땅기 갑자기 나양 아미로 봐 휴쇼치보다 뭐도 보는데 중수나 아니 별로톤서 균이 시기 있는데 카둥알랑 어디 균이 시기 있는데 카바탄이 시기 있는데 시에잖아 마인치 시스템아들 와 오스트레일리아 롱보드 프로페셔널 시우도 마인치 하고도 마인치 오도스니 아니 그냥 정말 제가 도지체 도지 시우드 사서 공공마서 시에이 안 상물로 남지시마도 자체가 변화리아 내 뒤에기 랑가지다 도지지 연구대 상보들 와 뒤에 선발리아 안 진호 공사 경고 친구 좋고서 치료 때에기 뭐남다 탑직 냠도 안 아주 갖고 있는 레고 비디 선바 냠도 용도부 치료 시스템 비교에 도지체 thank you so much thank you.
Thank you, Tenzin Dorongla. I think we should just take another moment and remember that the Chinese government is actively trying to undermine Australia's democracy. We know that now our intelligence agencies have publicly spoken about this, which is very unusual for them to do, to speak about matters like that. We also know it from incidences like Sam Dastyari. We know it from news reporting, and we know it because Tibetans, we know that's the way the Chinese government works. They like to try to divide and conquer. So I think it's really important that we Tibetans understand March 10th is not only about sending a message to the Australian community, and it's not only about sending a message to Parliament, but it's a message that we send to each other. It's a commitment that we make to each other. As our honourable member was saying, you know, this is about all of us pushing in the same direction. And I think it's really important as we have our democracy and as we have our political views and as we grow as participants in this democracy, we never forget that on days like today, it's to remind ourselves that we are first and foremost Tibetans. And so that's, I think, an important thing to remember. And whenever Tibetans like Tenzin Putala or any other Tibetans like Tenzin Putala stand up and try their best and have their best efforts to participate in the democracy and stand up to be leaders, we should all applaud that sacrifice and that service. So a big round of applause, not just for Tenzin Putala, but everyone else who serves in our Tibetan government. Now, he also mentioned there the need, for this to be a continuing movement, and we have lots of guests who have travelled from across New South Wales to join us today. But we have one very special guest here today. Is Tenzin Chokra here? So Tenzin Chokra, he is 13 years old and a member of the language class for the Sydney community. And it gives me great joy to see someone like this come forth and speak at an event like this. So I'd like you all to please give a very warm welcome to Tenzin Chokra.
Hello everyone, I'm Tenzin Chokra. I'm a 13-year-old Tibetan boy that is here today, talking in front of you all for one reason, to talk about this day. Today is a day in Lhasa, our capital city, where more than 1,000 Tibetans were killed by the Chinese military, and we remember their sacrifice. Today is the day we reminisce the darkest period of Tibet's history. In the year 1949, China started to attack and colonize the eastern parts of Tibet. Then the 10th of March 1959 is when Tibetans completely lost freedom and power over their country. Chinese military had finally took over Tibet after 10 long years. More than 1.5 million died from 1949 to 1980, and approximately 6,000 monasteries were destroyed. Luckily, His Holiness was not harmed. He was able to leave Tibet because of the wise words of the oracle. In the years of 1987, 1988, and 1989, the younger generation of Tibetans, born under the jurisdiction of the Chinese government, have been peacefully protesting against the Chinese authority over Tibet. This protest started in Lhasa, and over many years, this action slowly spread around Tibet, from village to village, city to city. Also then, the types of protests have changed. For example, self-immolation. More than 159 Tibetans have self-immolated with the wish of His Holiness returning to Tibet and Tibet's freedom, while hoping their sacrifice was not in vain. I'm a Tibetan teenager who's voicing for all the Tibetans that have protested and wished for Tibet's freedom since 1949 till now. I'm also voicing for all the prisoners that have been put in prison currently, for all that are fighting for freedom and all that have been sacrificed. This speech is not only for Tibetans, but for all other countries that are being colonized, or in threat of being so. This includes Mongolia, Afghanistan, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Ukraine. So please, everyone, help my voice and my words reach all that want to help. To the Americans, the British, the Australians, the UN, the Europeans, and all other countries that believe in human rights. Now, before we continue, I would like to say a story. It's a true story, by the way. A friend of my mother, named Yishi Thoten, stayed in jail, tortured for 8 months in our country, 2 times. He suffered so many injuries. My own mother was also tortured. I don't really know much about these problems that are in Tibet because I wasn't born at this time period, nor was I born in Tibet. But learning from my mother and from reliable websites, I realized that this problem is much bigger than I thought it was. So now I read history books, I learn history, I ask teachers in order to help me so I can learn about history. Now I'd like to say a special thank you to everyone that is here today. It means a lot to us. I also would like to thank all non-Tibetans for coming here and protesting in this peaceful protest. Again, it means a lot to all of us. Thank you to His Holiness for guiding us through this path of exile, and I wish you a life of prosperity. I also pray to all that have lost loved ones throughout COVID-19. We have all suffered economically and emotionally throughout this pandemic. So thank you all, and I hope we can meet in Lhasa soon. Pekara.
I think our
Alright, Diggs, I'm gonna leave today's live stream at that. There's lots of things I'd like to say, but I'll keep it clean today. One of these days, the world will come together and stand against who is trying to screw us, not hoping for wishes from the UN to try and make things better for places. Every country in this world needs to stand together against the tyranny of our fucking governments. But yeah, I can't listen to the problem is there's some people there with bad stories and all those sorts of problems, but it's all so much bigger than what a lot of people see. I feel sorry for everyone that is suffering in the world. The problem is we all need to come together to fix any of it. But thanks for joining us with today's stream. I've got things to do. Hope you have a good day.